I think discussions on Gukurahundi have been with us for quite some time now. And it is important to acknowledge that many people have attempted to deal with the topic, but there are people who want us to forget, who do not want us to deal with it. But thanks to everyone who has attempted to continue this dialogue, starting with people like Elena here, who refused to be silent and continue to break the silence when people would rather have us forgotten that event. Dialogue is an important avenue for pursuing truth-based reconciliation and achieving post-conflict justice. This particular dialogue comes within the context when our country is seeking to deal with its ugly past. And today, to facilitate this dialogue on Gukurahundi atrocities, we have an able panel. Before us today is Elena Sisulu. On my immediate left, in case some of you do not know her, on my right is Sibosan Malunga. On my extreme left, Professor Martin Rupia. And on my extreme right is Dr. Dumiso Davengwa. I am Alec Mchade Hama. I will be chairing this dialogue series for today. And I'll be doing more introductions in detail as each speaker comes. So without wasting much of your time, let us get into it. And I want to invite my first speaker, Elena Sisulu. She's an author and academic. She's taken part in the production of an important report, that is the Breaking the Silence report. She will open the discussion and set us in an engaging conversation. I wish to thank you and over to you, Elena.
Thanks very much. Just to speak on the mic. Okay, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today, and it's quite an experience to see old friends from way back in the days when I was a human rights activist. It's nice to see old friends from Crisis, my old colleagues and my former partners in crime, as Tony Wheeler and I like to say. It's also an interesting moment, both here in Zimbabwe and in my adopted country, South Africa. And the human rights, challenges of human rights and constitutionality, which affect both countries, but in different ways. I first of all want to just make a disclaimer. I'm not an academic. I know there are people here who are doing their PhDs and very impressive, acquiring very impressive academic qualifications, but I don't think I will put myself in that category. Maybe I would call myself now a children's literature specialist, but the issue of human rights never goes away. And I think as a Zimbabwean-born South African, I have at least to offer a perspective, a unique perspective of being in both societies and being able to see these issues. Of course, both countries having been affected by massive human rights violations and atrocities, a colonial history of brutality and dispossession, and a liberation movement history of and strong liberation dominated governments. Recently, when we had the unprecedented events here of the removal of former president. It's even strange to even say former President Mugabe here. The South Africans who have always admired Mugabe and who we've always debated with, were tweeting that, he will always be our hero no matter whatever the white press says. And so someone then tweeted something about Gukurahundi. I think it's from the film. And I haven't seen this film, but apparently it's a very powerful film. And I wish it would be a film which would be shown here. And maybe that's something that could be followed up to this discussions, because it's quite an impact to see this. And I just saw that someone tweeted just a little clip, which was very powerful, of a woman saying what happened to her and her family. So I forwarded that image, saying that this is, for South Africans who still admire Mugabe, this is Gukurahundi, and it's 1,000 times worse than Marikana. And its survivors walk amongst you. So there was a response immediately saying something about these people that promote the story of Gukurahundi are on steroids. So I responded and said, what do you mean? And he responded and said, went questioning the details about it and arguing that it's the dissidents and the South Africans that were behind this and apartheid. And I responded and said, nevertheless, whatever the case of dissidents, that doesn't justify killing of 20,000 people. And then he questioned the number, and then he referred to this report, the Breaking the Silence report. And my response was that, which was strange, he was referring to this report to support his argument that it wasn't as bad as people say. So I said, I'm aware of the report. I actually wrote the introduction to that report. And then he disputed this number of 20,000 and said, where do you get it from? The report actually says 5,000. I didn't go further into the debate, but I thought about it and thought, even if one said 5,000 people, it is 1,000 times as many people as Marikana. And I thought about it thinking, why is it that in South Africa, when Marikana happened, you had media coverage. Excuse me?
Sorry.
Can
you just allow him to finish? We respect your views.
But let her finish.
Sure. We'll give you time to question, to interrogate. But in the meanwhile, kindly be with us. Kindly be with her so that she finishes her presentation.
I'm not justifying anything. No, you are not listening. I haven't finished the point. I'm not justifying it at all. What I'm saying, and I agree as a human rights activist, killing is killing, whether it's 1 or 20 or 30. But when you talk about a massacre, when you talk about genocide, there is a difference. And there is a difference about how people classify massacres and genocides. No, and it's not justifying. It's not justifying.
Are you fighting the panel comrade? Why don't you let him finish? What's the problem? Hey, we have a protocol here. We listen to each other. We listen to each other.
Why are you standing up? Why are you standing up?
I'm talking to Japan.
No, it is the Japan Congress. Why are you standing up?
Sorry, can you help order, please?
Are you part of the No, wait,
no, the same way I'm not part of the panel. He's not the part of the panel. I said it's
No. Order, please. Sorry, excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me. I said we are going to give everyone a chance to intervene and to ask.
Yes, communication. No, but you're taking my friend. Communication is a two-way. It's such a yes,
Okay, yes. Thank you, Jafar. Thank you.
So I think this just shows how important this topic is. So let's move on.
And it also points to a level of intolerance. So on Marikana, because I have been reflecting on this, that on the memorial, every year on the memorial of Marikana, on the South African media, you have on the radio talk shows, and every radio station you can listen across languages. People are talking about Marikana. They are talking about what happened. They are condemning what happened. They are arguing about what should have been done, what shouldn't have been done. There's government people that come trying to explain and apologize. It is a big issue. And once the last memorial, I think it was 3 days on the radio, that this issue of Marikana, people were seized with. There is no time. People have produced artworks, there have been films. It is part of the political discourse, and it's a blot on the government, the current government. So this is an issue that will also haunt the president of the ANC if he becomes president of South Africa. And he will struggle with it in parliament, and he will constantly be confronted with this issue. And my thought was, how is it that you have this level of, and as a result of that focus on Marikana, that intense condemnation, the commentary from all sectors of society, the condemnation of the police, the call for charges against the people who were involved. In fact, the career of the police chief at the time, I mean, what happened at Marikana was partly her, led to her downfall. So there is this consciousness that this happens, and the value of this discussion, the value of the focus, and the value of the outcry is that it would prevent something like that happening again. That the South African government knows that it cannot just mess up and go or the next police chief will be hesitant before letting police go and just open up arms on people and kill them in that way. So, and Marikana has been compared to Sharpeville. People have said that, why are you doing what was done under apartheid? And you have no right to do that. And so it is a big thing. So contrary to what the gentleman is saying, I'm not justifying Marikana. I'm pointing out that it is a good thing in South African society that you have a media that has focus, and people have platforms, and people have not been prevented anyway from talking about this issue. They have not been prevented, and it is something which all South Africans know about. And my grappling with this is that, why would you have things in Zimbabwe, big human rights violations, and massive, which have caused massive disruption to a population, like Marikana and Gukurahundi, Operation Muramatsina, what happened in 2008 in the runoff. These are, the scale of these things are just astounding, and they happen. And the question is, why do they happen without, or why is it possible that a government can cause such mayhem and can visit such abuses and brutality on people and get away with it? And why is it that this happens here? And how did Gukurahundi happen? And as someone who grew up from family from Matabeleland, I recall the time which I've outlined in the report of this. There was no national outcry, there was no media, big story in the media, And people were getting killed, and the scale of killing was increasing. And it was whispers here and there. The topic here is not xenophobia. I have talked about xenophobia, and this is not the topic.
Sorry, excuse me. We hear what you are saying. Sorry, excuse me. Can we make progress, please? The topic which we are tackling here is Gukurahundi towards a national dialogue. So let's try to be a bit orderly and give yes. So let's give a chance to finish. Yes, among Zimbabweans. Okay, thank you.
You know, when there was xenophobic attacks in South Africa, I was one of those who worked day and night on this issue and worked to lobby with government, to lobby with civil society and the churches to stop this. As far as I'm concerned, I have a right to speak about human rights violations. In Zimbabwe, I grew up in Matabeleland. Some of my relatives were killed in Gukurahundi. As a result, I have a right to speak. I have a right to speak. I grew up there and I know what happened. And we would hear about these things directly from our relatives. And these things are documented. So those who want to deny, and want to...
How old are you? Old enough.
Gentlemen, I think we're here to deliver you the
She's answering us before
you can raise your issues.
Sorry, I said, I thought whatever you're saying and doing is that
you are sounding like you have been hired to come and disrupt the meeting.
Can we have one meeting, please? Can we have one meeting?
Tell us. No, you told me. Tell us why.
Can we have one meeting, please?
Can we have one meeting?
Yes, we are having one meeting.
I am given an opportunity to make a presentation.
But it's claiming that we are hired.
Yes, but we are
That's
also interested in
engaging you.
We are
And then we
interested in
have later.
Withdraw company. I don't say we're hired.
So what happens is that
She must be presented to answer us.
there is denial and intimidation, and I think I experienced intimidation over this issue because we are not supposed to be allowed to speak about it. And people have been silenced for a very, very long time. And this silence is continuing. Part of the problem that I see the difference between human rights violations in other places and the need to prevent them is a free media. It is absolutely necessary to have freedom of the media. Because if there was freedom of the media and there was open reporting, actually that scale of atrocities would have not happened. And also the cloudiness about it and the kind of debates and the denial. It's not possible to have denial with that scale of, in the open glare of the media. So for me, and I'll cut the discussion short because it's clearly difficult to talk about this. But my main point I think I want to make tonight is that such violations, the scale of such violations are possible in an atmosphere of media suppression. And if you look at the genocides, massacres elsewhere, it's not possible to do these things in open glare of the media. And I think we've made one of the things, the value of social media, it has its ills, but one of the values is that you have people being exposed. There's cameras everywhere. People are exposed for violations, for beating up, for assault, for murder, all these things, they get captured on camera. And I think there's a value to that. And for me, my critique of the Zimbabwean civil society is that there's been a lot of focus on the constitution, but not on constitutionality. And I think at the heart of actually preventing impunity, promoting accountability, is to have a constitution, to have media freedom. Because this is what gives people voice. And this is what, to have media freedom helps to a large extent to prevent violations. And so for the value of a discussion of Gukurahundi is to say, how can we prevent such things from happening again? And how can, and by doing that, it's important to have the discussions of these things. And to have the arguments and the counter-arguments is really very important. And in my view, in South Africa, I think there is a struggle on human rights violations. There is a struggle on police brutality. It's a constant struggle. And human rights organizations in South Africa struggle with this. But the facts, I think it could have been a lot worse if we did not have media freedom in South Africa. And in fact, throughout, even through the xenophobia outbreaks, the media and the presence of media has helped to actually prevent and has helped people to fight against this. So for me, there's a great plea for media freedom. There's a great plea that this is really a pillar to preventing such violations happening. And I want to say that there has been a focus on Gukurahundi. I wish there would be more of a discussion on Operation Murambachina. The reasons it happened, who the architects were, why it happened, but also people's responses to it. Because these things will repeat themselves. If we actually don't look at the reasons why these things happened, what is the ground on which these violations are based on, we need to actually see. And I'm sorry that we have an example of such serious
Sorry, can we have order, please?
All I have to say, I think I'll close. I think I'll close here, Chair. But all I can say is actually, shame on you, shame on you, shame on you.
Shame on your mother.
Sorry, excuse me. Sorry, excuse me. Shall we proceed? Okay, I hear you. Sorry, can we proceed? I think we have heard what Ellen has said. Can we give a big hand, please? Thank you, Ellen. I'm not going to attempt to, excuse me, can we proceed? I'm not going to attempt to summarize what Ellen has said, but among other things, she has said quite important things. That there are various narratives of what happened in relation to Gukurahundi. So there's therefore need to know the truth of what happened. And She has also said there is a lot of impunity issues in Zimbabwe which need to be dealt with. And importantly, there is need to prevent such events from happening, and so that we reach a never again situation. So what I'm going to do is to call upon the other speakers, then at the end we'll intervene, ask them questions, and then we proceed in that manner. Next, I'm going to call upon Sipo Malunga to make his presentation. Sipo is a human rights lawyer with extensive experience in justice and governance issues in Africa. He is currently at the helm of OSISA. He has previously worked for the United Nations program as a senior advisor in the regional program in Africa. He is a former defense attorney in the Tribunal for the Prosecution of War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity in the East Timor. He has various other experiences, but without wasting time, let me call upon Sipo to make his presentation. Sipo.
Thank you very much, Alec, and thank you all for making time to come and participate in this very important discussion. This discussion comes barely 2 days after the President signed the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission Act. The National Peace and Reconciliation Commission Act is meant to operationalize the process of truth and reconciliation and justice in the country. So, may I finish, colleagues? Thank you for your enthusiasm, and I appreciate it. But may I please finish? I really do appreciate it, genuinely. Now, colleagues, let us accept one fundamental thing. Our country has a legacy of violence. Our country, Zimbabwe, has a legacy of violence. Not only does it have a legacy of violence, it has a legacy of serious and very severe political intolerance. We cannot even allow each other to speak. What is this? Does it matter who someone is? We can't allow somebody to speak. And we think that this act that the President has signed, which is supposed to enable a process for 10 years of speaking to each other, of talking, of understanding, what are we saying about ourselves? I'm asking this question, comrades. And I'm using the word comrades deliberately. Are we saying there is no point? Are we doomed as a country? I'm asking this question. It's a fundamental question. So, for me it is very simple. My father here, he's my father.
Our father, a national.
No, he is my, trust me, yes.
He's also our father.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, he is a victim in many ways, but he's also a leader in our country. He is on his way out. It is left to us. Yet we cannot talk to each other. And I'm raising this fundamental question, comrade. But let me move on. Let me move on. The country, our country has a legacy of violence, dating back way to pre-colonial times. It's not the only country. It's not the only country. It's not the only country that has violence dating back to pre-colonial times. Even the United Kingdom. But we need to own and acknowledge and confront our own history, our own.
Yes. Zimbabwe.
As Zimbabweans. So, let me speak. Allow me to speak. Allow me to speak. So, whether we are talking about the Rosy Empire, the way in which Chibata Matosi, the way in which Monomutapa, the way in which they consolidated their strength, there were some measures of violence, there was some measure of cooptation, whether it's Mziligazi, whether it's Lopemula, thank you for your enthusiasm, whether it is Cecil John Rhodes, and the way in which he came into this country, there was violence. There was violence, we know that. The Rhodesian government was established through violence. That is why, may I finish? That is precisely why the likes of our father here went to the war. Because they realized that talking was not helping. But what did they resort to? They resorted to violence. They went to the war. They went to the war. They were the first people to go to the war because they realized that if they were asking the white minority regime nicely to respect their rights, to give them their land, to give them the right to vote, they were not being listened to. They were being thrown in jail. They were being abused. They were being beaten. So they decided it is now time to fight. And they went to the war. And they fought. And it worked. Because in 1980, we got our independence. So violence works. It has always worked. And then, once we got our independence, please may I finish? I think let's respect each other enough. Let's respect each other enough. So, in 1980, the culmination of the violence between the liberation movement and the Rhodesian government was a truce brokered in Lancaster. And this truce ushered in the possibility for black majority rule. So, the outcome of the war, the outcome of very intense and fierce violence, was political power. That's what came out. But it also ushered in multi-party democracy. It ushered in multi-party democracy with PF ZAPU as the opposition party. But of course, having instrumentalized violence as a political instrument, it was not long before violence was another instrument to crush PF ZAPU, to destroy it, to create a one-party state. And the violence was intense, it was horrible, it was horrendous. It resulted in thousands of people being killed, so that there could be consolidation of power by ZANU-PF. There is absolutely no contradiction about that reality. We can shout, we can make noise, we can try to stop people talking. This happened. People were killed in their thousands.
What were the circumstances?
In their thousands.
No, but you
So,
continue with injustice.
You're trying to talk, my friend, please.
Yes, but we just want clarity.
We don't want to
so, comrades, let me continue, please. I have absolutely no problem. I have absolutely no problem answering questions. Can I say this?
But you get the chance.
So, 1980, 81 to 1987, the violence, so the instrumentalization of violence as a political tool continues.
So you just sit there, relax and enjoy it.
Until,
You don't control what people say.
until colleagues, 1987, until, because the violence persists.
Don't rewrite history. Don't rewrite history.
In 1987,
There were issues. It's not just for getting power.
in 1987,
Don't rewrite history.
The parties sit down.
Have you heard about Ntubane incident?
The parties sit down in 1987.
It was the abduction and kidnapping of tourists.
And they sign an agreement, a political power sharing agreement. And the power sharing agreement ends the violence.
The unit accord whereby people were coming together as Zimbabweans, not a power sharing agreement. It was people coming together.
Let me be very honest. Let me be very honest here. Dr. Mandazo, may I say something? I was invited here to speak.
Yes.
So my understanding, no. Listen.
Facts, don't speak opinions, speak facts. If you speak facts, you will not even interdict or say anything. So just say facts and statement.
Sorry, excuse me.
I'm not interested.
Can I say this? I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask questions
What happened in Seki?
and to seek any clarifications. So let him finish.
No, but he's misleading the house.
You ask him that. So let's move on, please. Okay.
My view is this. So I will continue because I believe there's more people who are interested in hearing what I have to say than the people that are not interested in what I have to say. And I believe that those people will engage me about what I've said, whether it is accurate or inaccurate, when I've finished, and I'll be happy to engage them back again. So I will continue, and I will consider the other interruptions as what we probably should expect in such conversation now and going forward. I hope that this is being captured so that at some point in time, the authorities who are trying to usher in an era where we can account for our past understand the complexity of dealing with this. We must accept that we are going to find detractors in our midst. We want to fix all the problems that have happened in our country. So at the end of the day, I hope that those that are listening and are willing to engage me will engage me afterwards. So, 1987, the violence culminates in a power sharing agreement, just like 1980, and the violence stops. The violence stops, totally. The Zipra commanders are released. My father is released from jail as well. I lost an entire childhood. So I'm a victim. I am a victim. I have relatives who died. My father is dead. You know, I saw it. I experienced it. I'm not reading about it in a book. That's why I got interested in human rights. So in case anybody wants biographies and CVs, we can talk about that. I'm not talking about something I read in a book. So I'll continue speaking, and I'll never, ever stop speaking. So 1987, there's a power sharing agreement. Dr. Joshua Nkomo becomes vice president. The violence does stop. And genuinely it stops. There's peace again in the country. The commanders are released. The senior ZAPU leaders are released. They join the government. Everything is okay. 89, 88, 89, there's amnesties. The dissidents stop. Everything is fine. 89, 90, Boy decides, okay, I'm forming Zoom. I'm sick and tired. He'd been complaining and criticizing Mugabe for so many years. They were allies, remember, he was Secretary General of ZANU for many years. One of the longest serving members of ZANU, one of the people who formed ZANU. So he goes, eventually he's kicked out of ZANU, he goes to Mutare, he sits at home, then one day he decides, oh, no, now I want to be president. He manages to convince a few people, Kombai included. What happens? Violence starts again. Kombai is shot, almost killed. This is 1990, those elections. You remember them, those who were there. Violence returns to the country. Because when there's politics and there's contestation for power, we have to have violence. That's what we do. And then Two-Boy realizes, no, I can't achieve this. This is too big for me. He goes away quietly, and then the violence stops again. 1990, quiet. Peaceful again. 91, 92, 93. Of course, the violence comes up in other forms. When the trade unionists, Morgan Tsvangirai, they protest. When we students at the university, we protest. There's violence, there's police, there's tear gas. We fight running battles for weeks. But the violence is not as intense. 2000, MDC is formed. The violence comes back. It comes back again with every successive election, culminating in the West in 2008. We have to own this, colleagues. We must own it. We've allowed violence to flow in our veins, in our blood as a country. We cannot pretend it's not happening. We have to find different ways of contesting politics, of contesting power. Like other people in other countries. They don't kill each other over power. Relatives killing relatives. We make many excuses. There's so many excuses we make. He's MDC. He must die. Zapu, he must die. Zoom, he must die. What the F for? We can't even listen to each other. What more when we are fighting for power? So, I had to, in fact, I digress. That was not really what I wanted to talk about. But I ended up talking about that instead. What did I want to talk about? When it comes to Gukurahundi, because this is about Gukurahundi, and I've already told you I'm a victim. But I'm not here necessarily as a victim. I'm here as a Zimbabwean who is genuinely interested in being part of a process that allows our country to heal, that provides justice for people, that enables our country to move forward from this. This is why I'm here. And I hope that I'm joined by people who share the same vision as me. I understand that there are so many conceptions and misconceptions about Gukurahundi. And I believe that we all have time to understand it. We all have time to talk about it. But we are going to have to listen to each other. Most importantly, we're going to have to listen to the people who are not in this room, which is what I wanted to talk about from the beginning, the victims. There is no process of truth or healing that can ever succeed unless it places victims at the central part of that process. So, we're all analysts. I mean, I have master's degrees in this issue in human rights. I've worked in international criminal courts. I've defended militia commanders who massacred hundreds and hundreds of people. I've done that. I've defended them. It sounds odd, right? How do I defend someone who commits serious violations of human rights? I have defended people like that. But I've never, ever wavered from a commitment to ensuring that victims get the justice they deserve. A lot of my clients were convicted, of course. They were as guilty as hell. They committed those crimes. They told me about it. I defended them to the best of my ability. Some of them got better sentences, some of them didn't. But I put everything into defending them because they deserved a fair trial. They didn't deserve to be lynched by a mob, because when a war is finished and the villagers come and they say, he came to my village, they killed 200 people from our village. I defended people like that. At the end of the day, it is very easy to say, okay, let's kill him. I was not going to let that happen. I wanted the truth to come out. What happened? We asked the victims, are you sure it was him? Why are you saying it was him? I knew him. I know him. So the point is that processes enable truth to come out. Only processes enable truth to come out. But those processes must be in such a way that they enable victims to speak. I'm very worried about what I've observed today. I've said I'm a victim. I'm a victim that will never ever accept to be told to shut up anyway. But I'm worried about the victims that are out there. We have thousands of victims that are afraid for their lives, who saw their relatives being killed, who saw their sisters, their mothers being raped. The government has decided to start a process to fix this. And I am very heartened and very happy about the commitment by the government to do this, especially because, and I'm sure the president is aware that he is one of the people who are implicated, but he signed the law. He signed the law. This should tell us something. This should tell us something about the availability of an opportunity and perhaps a commitment by the leaders, the political leaders, to address this issue. We need to meet them halfway. We need to meet them halfway. We need to push them. We need to challenge them. Especially because the thing that has been missing is the victim's voice. So for me, and I'll stop because there's other things I wanted to say, but I got distracted. At the end of the day, colleagues, we have to create the right conditions for the victims. We have to create the right conditions for the victims. It will not happen that this process will be genuine if the conditions are not right for the victims to speak about their pain. And at the end of the day, I am very confident because I know Zimbabweans are very forgiving. I know Zimbabweans are very resilient. We now talk about 37 years we enjoyed under President Mugabe. We talk about it as if it was 5 years. So we are resilient. We can get past things. I think we forgive too quickly before we talk. I think we forgive, maybe we don't even forgive. That's why we keep killing each other. But that needs to stop. For whatever reason, it needs to stop. Whether it is violence, I've talked about political violence, but there's other forms of violence. There's sexual violence, right? There's domestic violence. There's sexual and gender-based violence. There's violence everywhere. So there's absolutely, we have no way to avoid this discussion. And I will stop by saying thank you for those who have patiently listened to me. I really hope that we can engage. I can engage on any issue, on this issue or any other issue. But I think that we do have that opportunity. And thank you to my panelists. Thank you, Sis Eleanor. I have the highest respect for you. I've always had the highest respect for you. It's not going to change. I have the highest respect for my fellow panelists, Dr. Martin, Rupia, my comrade here, Alec. We used to spar when I was a lawyer back in Bulawayo. When I was a young junior lawyer, he was a prosecutor before he became a bigger lawyer somewhere else. And then of course my father here, nothing but respect. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you, Sipo. I think Sipo has raised a number of important issues. Among them that we have a history of violence, and that this violence has been cyclic since time immemorial. Is also talked about an important issue that these things that we do has to be victim-centered. Lastly, he indicated that there has been recently enacted an act which gives us an opportunity to engage. Another big hand for Sipo. Thank you. Let me, at this juncture, call upon Professor Martin Rupia to make his presentation. Professor Rupia is an academic with the Institute of African Renaissance Studies, UNISA. He's also yes. Among those, he's also an executive director of the African Public Policy Research Institute based in Pretoria. He supervises masters and doctoral students. He has various experiences. Again, I have to kindly request you to listen to his presentation. You are going to be given an opportunity to engage him, ask him and clarify whatever he would have said. Thank you in advance for your cooperation, Professor Rupia.
Kenel Rupia. Don't call him Professor, it's a Kenel.
First, I want to thank Dr. Ibu Mandaza for inviting us to make some remarks.
Thank you, and how was it?
The second point is, of course, I'm hoping as Zimbabweans, we can begin to engage on what the government has done in publishing the National Peace and Reconciliation Act number 2 of 2018. The work that we do as African Public Policy and Research Institute is continental. So I will begin with 2 examples on the continent that reflects that what is happening in Zimbabwe is not necessarily unique, but it gives us a number of important points for us to take on board. The first is the events taking place in Togo. Okay? After the military coup of 1963, the OAU had to first deal with the military coup in Togo, where after the death of Eyadema in February 2005, his son then took over. The events in Togo are that the people have been on the streets protesting the nature of civil-military relations between the state and society. And in the New Year's address by President Farah Eyadema, he began to call for national dialogue. So it's important to begin to see, 50 years after the Eyadema family took power, the president now is talking about dialogue, national dialogue. I actually have a paper which I sent to the organizers. So after my remarks, you can ask for a copy of the paper to begin to see the nature of the argument that I began to develop. So it's important for us to, if we don't deal with the problems facing Zimbabwe today, they will continue to haunt us in the future. That is the point that we must draw from. The second point is about Ethiopia. Ethiopia, in January of 2018, suddenly released all political prisoners and closed down one of the major prisons. The decisions why Ethiopia has done that are not very clear. But certainly the Prime Minister, Haile Mariam, has explained that he is trying to foster national reconciliation. It's important we take on board. Now, the decision by the Ethiopian government follows important infrastructure and economic policies that Ethiopia was undertaking, which then stopped suddenly in 2016. Because the people in Oromia had not been fully consulted, they started protesting, so they stopped the plans of development. What is it that we can draw from there? We have seen a number of very positive policies adopted by the new government since November 2017. But if those policies are not grounded within a society that is integrated, recognizing the differences within that society, those policies will not benefit the public. One of the elements that you can draw from Ethiopia was that the government invited foreign direct investment. There were factories in the rural areas and also industries. And the people rose up and bent down one of those factories, which was a surprise in terms of how the government is trying to develop the country, and yet you have the same people disagreeing with public policy. So I think it's an important point that you must draw. But there are 2 points that I wish to draw to our attention before making some recommendations. Because we have been on this road of national peace and reconciliation before. There are processes that have failed, and I'm hoping now we can find each other to try and find a way to go forward and find a positive forward. And the first point to note is that although we have some of the organized people around Gukurahundi, there are other areas that also government must pay attention. And in my discussion with government officials, that has already been acknowledged. Okay? The issues that my colleagues were referring to, Muramba China, in May and June 2005. I've not looked at it, and of course, you can also look at the events around Marange.
Don't be selective. Your contribution should be wholesome.
No, I'm coming to that.
Focus on Chimoy and Zonia, please. Obviously, your perspective is
give me an opportunity to
a former secretary is speaking for other folks.
You can't speak of peace.
One of the things that
not you, Kenneth.
No, one of the things in my introduction, I was introduced as a lieutenant colonel.
Obviously, peace will never come
One of the things that we can learn is how South Africa approaches.
Sorry. Can you allow him to make his presentation, please?
One of the things
Let him make his presentation.
going forward, one of the things the South African
Only corporate director is listening over this issue.
Because you have
Rupia is an extradition soldier. Not the colonel.
They violated human rights
He's a
again
victim
and
of war
again.
crimes. No war crimes. Tribal when they apply
events that go in the post-colonial and the colonial.
You can't speak.
You do not confine
what happened in Chimoyo.
all of those things must be dealt with.
He's the only person listening.
Yes.
Not experience victim.
Colonel Rupia, aka Special Agent.
One of the things that we must learn to achieve.
So why is it
You must be balanced. You must be balanced. A special agent killing Africans. A black man like yourself. Special agent. A special agent. No, Rupia will get emotional. Rupia will get
Only Comrade Javemba can speak to this house. We will listen. Let Comrade Javemba speak. Okay. This one is a liberator. No. Rupia cannot speak. Give Comrade Javemba's mouth. We will listen completely. Listen, the only person to absent this one said, you are killing the world. I will not address morning. Let's comrade Daremba speak. Let's comrade Daremba speak.
You will not address us. Don't pay for this. I'm sorry for the last person.
We know about Timoyo. We know about Jonah. We know about everything that happened there.
We know. No. You're not qualified. You cannot qualify. Talk about everything you know.
I'm sorry.
You Mr. Daremba is only the person to speak about it. An extradition, whatever can know. Coming here to talk about Gukurahundi. Answer about Timoyo and that's the only face. Only to Mr. Daremba here is the only eligible.
Let's comrade Daremba speak. No problem.
Not in this gathering. Not in this gathering. Rupia will continue. Rupia will continue.
I want to say people are going to look at the way we speak.
We will listen to the next morning.
What condition?
On the condition that
We will listen to the condition that Rupia face confesses.
finishes.
No, Rupia will not finish. Rupia won't finish. Comrade, unless if you want Rupia won't finish. The only way you want to come out of Rupia is a confession on Chimoye. Confess on that. You confess on that.
Let comrade Daremba speak.
No, Rupia must confess first.
Look, guys, if you don't allow Rupia to speak, I will not speak. You can go if you don't allow him to.
No, we will not go.
I'm part of a panel. Rupia is part of the panel.
Conclude your address.
He must conclude his address.
Thank you, sir.
Conclude your address in 1 minute.
In 1 minute.
Okay.
60 seconds.
Can you now listen? Let him
Rupia, no. You are now conspiring. I have all the way from 45. You think we're going to have it? 45. 45. You even come here. 44. Shame. 43. Come and Rupia. 68. Come and Rupia. Come and Rupia. 67. Come and Rupia. 65.
The point I was going to make.
Rupia was confessed on Chimoye. So it's simple. He's an ex-tradition soldier. He's an ex-tradition soldier. Promoted. Okay,
Very briefly,
22.
the national reconciliation must not confine itself
17.
only to the present.
16.
It must also take into account events that happen.
18. Yes.
This is when you look at the TRC in South Africa, you will find that they looked at events from the 1960s.
8.
And that is the point I'm making.
7. Yes. Thank you. It follows ask him to take time because ask him to finish his speeches.
Can we proceed? I think Professor Rupia, that is but under very difficult circumstances. But nonetheless, can you give him a big hand? As Sipo has indicated, I think this is some of the things that we have to deal with going forward. And this thing is going to be extremely difficult to deal with. Let me now call upon Baba Yeluga. Allow me to call upon Dr. Dawenga. Let me introduce him first.
Yes.
I'm now going to call upon our last speaker, Dumiso Dabengwa. I think he does not need any introduction. So let me not waste your time and call upon Dr. Dabengwa to speak.
Our chairperson, I would like to believe that I've been given the floor, and I don't take very kindly to people cheering at me when I speak. I'm very disappointed. At independence in 1980, I, Comrade Mchulu, and other colleagues fell under the command of General Walls. And if General Walls is the one who commanded the bombings that were done in those places that you've been mentioning. If Rupia was there, he was merely there as a soldier and carried out what he should have done. But in order, that's why in military language we have ceasefires. And in order to correct the wrongs of yesterday, we had to sit down and be able to get this country to move, to get some of you to be born who would have not been born otherwise. The issue we are discussing is a very serious issue, the Gukurahundi event. I want to welcome the organizers of this dialogue for having invited me to come, first as a victim, and secondly as somebody representing all the ZAPU members, over 20,000 of them, who were killed by the Gukurahundi, not by the Rhodesian forces, but by some of our own Zimbabwean brothers under the 5th Brigade. This, I hope we must all understand if we're to resolve the issue of Gukurahundi, which has not been resolved to this date. Some 3 years ago, I remember being grilled by a Sunday Mail young reporter who wanted to know about what actually happened. At the end of that interview, this young man was in tears, and he said to me, "But my father, you are going to go and leave us with this unresolved issue, this serious unresolved issue. What do you expect is going to happen to us? At that time, I say to him, well, you better appeal to the powers that be to listen to what people have to say about the issue of Gukurahundi and find a way of correcting it. Because if it is not corrected, for generations to come, the issue of Gukurahundi is going to remain a very sad and difficult issue for the young generation that did not see exactly what happened. And those, in particular, whose parents and relatives were victims of Gukurahundi, like my young man here, Sipu. In order to be able to explain the issue and find a way of resolving this issue for the benefit of those who were not born or who were too young to understand. Let me very briefly recap exactly what happened. The Gukurahundi issue was not an accident. It was planned. It was planned very meticulously by those who carried it out. The idea was firstly to destroy ZAPU as an opposition. And in carrying out that, it spilled over even to the innocent people who happen to be Ndebele speaking. The issue of arms caches was used as an excuse. I spent 5 years, almost 4 years, 10 months exactly, at Chikurubi prison, maximum prison, even after the courts had found me not guilty. When it came out very clearly who had actually planned to have those arms caches, my lawyer, Alan Elliott, is here. But for those who would want to know more, that case has got its records in court. It's got the judgment that you can go and search on and read and found it, and you'll be able to find out exactly as to whether we were responsible for catching those arms. It became very clear in court that the Rhodesian CIO, working in cohorts with the South African intelligence wanted to destabilize this country. And they are the ones who caused the catching of those weapons by buying some Zipra commanders to do so. And this came out, the evidence is there, it came out very clearly. And the people who actually did the catching did point out that they were told by those special CIO guys that you catch these weapons, make sure that Masugu and Davewa don't get to know about it, because those are already bought over by the government. And that evidence is there. After that, as a result of that, as I have already mentioned, the Zipra commanders, including myself, were arrested. Gomo was expelled from the coalition arrangement, and that's further Zimbabwe. And Gomo and other ZAPU ministers that were there in that coalition arrangement were expelled. And Gomo had to leave the country. Read Msipa's book, the late Msipa's book, and he gives an account of that very clearly in his book. So, it was a plan. It was a plan to destroy ZAPU. Later on, it became clear when the South African intelligence got behind the back of those in government who they thought they were collaborating with, and created Super ZAPU, which were dissidents of their own making. And that gave more impetus to those who were in command of the Gukurahundi 5th Brigade to cause more massacres of the ZAPU people and the Ndebele people in Matabeleland in the Midlands. That is what happened. The people in Matabeleland have not yet had closure for the relatives that perished during that period. Efforts were made by ZAPU in the opposition. His father was one of the people who made lots of noise in Parliament about the need to get this issue resolved. And there were no ears to listen to him. And other colleagues in ZAPU who challenged government to do something about it. It was only when the issue of the new constitution was discussed that we were able to come up with a recommendation for a peace and reconciliation commission. The late Cyril Ndebele was appointed as chairman. When he went through the act, the draft act, he found it had problems. It was not absolutely independent as per requirement of the Constitution. And there were quite a number of other flaws that he pointed out. It was sent back to Parliament. And I want to appreciate, as SIPO has done, that finally we now have an act which has been gazetted and which has been signed by the current president. A very good sign indeed. But what remains to be done is the appointment of a chairperson so that this thing can move forward. So that the commission can be able to get down to its work and be able to make the necessary recommendations to government on how this should be handled. However, there are two hurdles that I think they need to sort out first with the support of all of us Zimbabweans, the media included, and that is the release of the two commission reports, the Chiambapa Commission and the Tumbujena Commission reports. Those reports are compilation of exactly what happened when the people who gave evidence had it still fresh in their minds. They made it very clear. Public funds were used to pay the costs of those two commissions. Most of the countries have had whatever they call their secrets or their confidential documents released after 20, 30 years. We are over that period now in Zimbabwe, over 30 years. And we still will not publish the Tumbujena and the Chiambapa Commission reports. They are very key. 75% of the people who were eyewitnesses to what happened have now passed on. And it is important to get back to those reports and compare them to some extent with the Catholic Commission reports in order to get to understand the facts about actually what happened. The chairman of the Peace and Reconciliation Commission needs to be appointed with haste. And I think we should all put our pressure on making sure that the next thing is to have this appointment done. When I got invited to this dialogue, I asked myself the question, what is the dialogue about? There have been a number of issues that have been raised by people who were not even born during Gukurahundi. And they come out and say things which are completely not true about what they heard from third parties about what happened in Gukurahundi. I think we need to get the commission to get into this matter, to unveil the truth about Gukurahundi. The reports, as I've said, have been made, and in my opinion, it was a genocide, and it should be treated as such, nothing else but genocide. I don't know whether this dialogue comes along under some political pressure or not. I don't think it is an issue that needs politicizing. It is an issue that needs to be resolved. And dear fellow Zimbabweans, let's help each other. On the 18th of November last year, people came out in their numbers and demanded that they want a fresh Zimbabwe to build a new Zimbabwe that they envision. And if we are to do that, Gukurahundi stands on the way. It is one of the issues that we must resolve. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Davengwa. I'm not going to attempt to dilute this presentation. Yes, yeah, I can't and I won't. All I can say is that those who have ears have heads. What I'm going to do though is, I know you've given hands to you, but let me ask you to give again a big hand to Dr. Davengwa. At this juncture, what I'm going to do is to open the debate to the floor. I'm going to ask perhaps people to ask questions. And if you have a question, you can say if you want who you are and who you are, direct to the question to. You can also comment, you can also make recommendations. But whatever your interventions, let us be tolerant of each other. And also make your questions and interventions short.
I'm sure I can be heard. My voice is loud enough. I have a very brief comment and a very brief question. My first, I'm Henry Zinochkiwe. My comment is the following. Before coming here, I honestly took it for granted that any issues of reconciliation we want to talk about have to be restricted from the moment we were independent, 1980 onwards. But after supposed presentation, and I must thank all the speakers, I found them all enlightening. I suddenly realized that if we have had a culture of violence, maybe we might omit other people. Yes. Even before independence, many of us know there has been conflict both within the liberation movement and between them. And even as students at university, we know people like the late Edson Stoll. He just disappeared. Nobody ever talked about him. So my question is, are we able to define a cutoff point to say, let's restrict ourselves from this period onwards, or are we leaving it completely open-ended even to pre-colonial time? Any of the
Yeah, your name?
Okay, my name is Jenisani. Anyway, I run a small project. It's still a laptop organization, but it specializes on ZAPU Zipra nationalist history. So Gukurahundi is a coincidental point of interest for me. Anyway, my question is directed to Comrade Dabengwa. The time I'd written down the name of the state witness in your trial, the one who is doing around Vic Falls, but I've forgotten the name. But it appeared in the ZAPU report, the last ZAPU report of the Congress of '86 before Unity. It's somewhere there. But anyway, the point is the time that you were incarcerated and up to the time of what we can call Gukurahundi in general, there are some suggestions. I was not old enough then. I was a teenager, of course, 85, I was 17. But I cannot eloquently say. But anyway, there the implicated issue of Tanzanian troops serving the part of 5 Brigade. There are implications that have come across, I don't know if ever, that came to your ears, that sometimes Tanzanian troops, there are troops who could neither speak Shona nor Ndebele, who are suspected to have been Tanzanian troops at the climax of 5 Brigade. I don't know how far true is that. And also the issue of disappearances that took place at the Dukwe camp. People who were never accounted for. A few I've met ended up in the NC. I've met a few, and some were never accounted for even after the whole process took place. I don't know if you've ever come across these issues and are they of any interest to you. And finally, to Sipo, you talked of East Timor. Do you see any parallel in the case studies that Gukurahundi and East Timor? That's all from me. Thank you.
I'm John. Questions for Dr. Davengo. One is there any consensus on the demands that people are placing, particularly the victims? Is there any consensus? That's number one. Number two, has there been any... Pardon? Is there any consensus on what the victims of Gukurahundi and others like you who suffered through this period actually are demanding from the powers that be? Consensus on the demands, on what should be done, for instance. Then the second question is, the ZAPU archive papers, has there been any discussion about, if we read our history today, we know that it's very thin on the contributions of ZAPU. And we also know that some of the materials were taken as part of the early 80s. Is that part of the, is there any discussion around making those materials available as part of the reconciliation process? And if so, has there been any sense of whether that's going to happen or if those archive papers still exist? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I'm going to call upon 3 questions at a time, ask the panelists to respond, then we'll move on. So the 3 questions have been asked. I'm going to ask the panelists to respond, then we go to the second round. So we're going to respond to the first question from Professor Zelensky.
The Constitution is silent on that. So it's a matter that would have to be defined. But what is clear is that the duration of the operation of the Commission is 10 years. So that probably gives an indication in terms of the scope of work at hand. My sense is that because the Constitution is silent, the Commission would have to make choices about, the period that it wants to cover. and those choices are likely to be guided by the impact of focusing on a particular choice, the impact that is likely from focusing on a particular choice. I do not see, for example, the Constitution escaping the necessity to deal with Gukurahundi because of the impact and because of the, the implications that that particular period had. I also do not see them escaping, for example, the more recent periods of violence, 2008. But look, we are here shooting in the air. We don't know what the commission will focus on, but the Constitution is silent. Can I, while I have the floor, answer the question on East Timor so that I don't have to, come back to it? Are there parallels with East Timor? To be very honest with you, each conflict is different. The parallels I can share is this. The largest part of the people that ended up in East Timor were two processes. Were the prosecution of perpetrators that committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, during the transition from independence. So we actually had a court, an international tribunal that was established by the United Nations to try perpetrators. So at the end of the day in East Timor, what we had were militia commanders who actually carried out the acts. But for those of you who might know the history of East Timor, basically the Indonesians orchestrated and planned the commission of most of those crimes. But the foot soldiers, the people who were on the ground, who actually did the killing, the shooting, the massacres, were Timorese. There were exceptions where you have the Indonesians military intelligence and the Indonesian military, but by and large, the architects were sitting in Indonesia, and the perpetrators, the militia commanders, were in East Timor. They were funded and supplied and resourced by the Indonesian military and the government. So we had a process to prosecute the militia commanders because they were all caught, except those who ran away and hid in Indonesia. But by and large, most of the senior militia commanders were caught, and I had the opportunity to defend most of them. I defended almost all the militia commanders that committed those crimes. So parallels, the Constitution and the Act doesn't envisage prosecutions. It envisages a process of truth-telling, of peace, reconciliation. It doesn't. There are some people who are saying there should be prosecutions. But the reality is that the framework we have doesn't envisage that. And it's not a bad thing either. South Africa made a choice. They were not going to go the prosecution route. They were going to go straight to the truth and reconciliation route. It's not the only country that has chosen that. There's many others that have. There was, however, in East Timor, we set up a separate process for truth and reconciliation. And what used to invariably happen is that there were some cases that used to get taken off the justice system, the formal system, and get pushed away there. But the more serious crimes, the more egregious crimes, where we had serious massacres, we had people massacring people in churches, literally, burning 200 people in a church, killing, So those are the kind of crimes. But those ones never got then sidelined to the reconciliation. So experiences are different. And then there's other experiences, of course, from Latin America, Guatemala, and Argentina, and so on. So there's many experiences to learn from around the world, and in Africa too.
Comrade.
Thank you. Yes, there were a number of cases of disappearances that were witnessed during Gukurahundi, in as much as they were during the time of our incarceration. And I would be very happy to get your record of what you have so that we can compare notes. I am available, so let's see what you have and we can compare notes. But having said that, only yesterday I was doing two affidavits, one belonging to the person who was my second in command in the Zipra intelligence, Ethan Dube, who was kidnapped in Botswana during the liberation struggle because his relatives wanted a transfer of housing from one name to the other. The master of the High Court required that. The second one I was doing was of a young man in his early 20s, whose father was killed during Gukurahundi. And he needed to do this in order to be able to get an ID. He's 25 years of age, and he's been going around without an identification at all. I had to do those two affidavits, and this is part of the consequences of Gukurahundi. The other one, of course, was during the liberation struggle by the Rhodesians. The second question involves the issue of whether there is consensus on what the victims of Gukurahundi would want to see done. Yes, the first consensus, and those who attempted to gather any evidence under the Peace and Reconciliation Commission were told right through their approaches to the people that they needed a public apology first from government before they could get on to talk about it. And they said it's high time this thing happened, with two commissions that were set up by government, gave the report to government, and we've never heard of the results of those commissions. And we think the starting point should be an apology by those representing the government of the day. That is the consensus, and they are very strong on that. And as far as the composition of the 5th Brigade is concerned, I don't exactly know who were involved in the 5th Brigade. There are a number of stories that come out. The only person I know who was in command is Shiri, Parents Shiri, who was the commander of that brigade. But as to the composition of the people that he was commanding, I was not privy to it, and I've not been able to find out exactly. And the last one is on ZAPU archives. When ZAPU was targeted to be destroyed, it was not just the human lives that were taken away. ZAPU properties, which have not been returned to ZAPU to this date, including the history of ZAPU's contribution during the liberation struggle. All those things are still outstanding. We've discussed them with the previous head of state and got nowhere. I hope to be able to raise it with the current president of what is supposed to be a new Zimbabwe. shortly.
Now we're going to take our second round. Can we sit down first? Can you now ask your questions or comment?
Okay, thank you very much. My first question goes to our veteran nationalists. My name is Tafazo Wadi, aka Gisela. I'm doing my PhD at the University of Namibia, and I'm based in Tanzania. I'm a political scientist by profession. My question goes to Comrade Minister with regards to what you said in answering one of the questions that came from the floor. You say you are trying to assist a 25-year-old boy who is failing to get his national identity cards. Now, as far as I remember, I think the issues of Gukurahundi were settled, I think, around 1987. They were settled? Can I be protected or I do my own way? I'm not using to be heckled by adults. Okay, so, Dr. Dumisa, I would have wanted you to clarify that, because a person who is 25 years old now, or even last year, could have been born by 1992. When Gukurahundi had already ended. So I'm not trying to go this question so that and by then you were in government as a Minister of Home Affairs, I think. So I'm not asking this question in order to provoke you, but perhaps I understand challenges associated with maybe age, where you may miss years, okay, or memory rather. But I'm not saying you are wrong in that, but I want you maybe to give me a concrete answer around 25 years. Then secondly, I think we have dwelled so much in explaining the circumstances that happened during the Gukurahundi period. But I think we have given very little value, if there was any need to, with regards to the circumstances surrounding what provoked everything that turned out to what we are talking about today. My question then goes to, I think we have, let me just go bullet. I'm informed by history as a child who was born in 1986, maybe at the later stages of that period, that there were 9 tourists that were abducted in the provinces where the atrocities that we're talking about today happened. While we're talking about Gukurahundi and the need to deal with the situation in Matabele and maybe compensatory issues that have been prescribed by panelists, okay? My question is, what is in these processes for those 9 tourists that we cannot account for, at least at the level of government? I think I am quite very much aware that the government cannot account for those people who disappeared at the hands of one Richard Gwesela. What are we going to do about that, and whether there is, in the processes that we are talking about here and the discussion that we are having, there is any justice that is going to be given to them and their families who would also want to understand what happened to their families. Who were only
I think the question is...
Secondly, my question is, I respect Dr. Ikomanda so much that perhaps in a few years' time I could be called by this title as well. I look forward to, and I'll be happy to join your family. But my question is, when you are holding discussions around sensitive issues like these ones, wouldn't it be advisable also to have, now you were talking about the NRPC, but I think this discussion is completely inconclusive insofar as representations from government around that commission, so that we don't seem to be holding these discussions in order to amass whatever comes from what people are paying to get in, rather than to see justice being done to the people of Matabele. I would have wanted to see even a lot of victims on the panelists than essential and brittled and invited people to prescribe solutions to us. Let me also say, and this question goes specifically to Ms. Susulu, Or another word that you would want to be called for. Please give me my time. Ms. Susulu, this is my question to you. You are coming from South Africa at the backyard of serious xenophobic attacks that have been taken against our own people called Zimbabweans, which you would want to identify with now that you are saying you are adopted by South Africans. I don't know whether by the government or South Africans or what. But I'm saying there are civil society organizations in South Africa insofar as we have got competent civil society organizations in Zimbabwe, including Ibechuluka Zulu. And I think they are playing their part in pushing for government to recognize what happened there, and the government has done just that. I think Comrade Mchadeyama told, okay, lawyer Mchadeyama talked about how government has signed the then bill into the act now. So my question is, don't you think that we have enough both intellectual and researching arsenal to resolve matters that happens on our backyard without necessarily involving people that may potentially have a nefarious agenda? You are talking about the Marikana Commission. Nothing has come from the government of Zimbabwe, not even Botswana for that matter. For the simple reason that we respect matters that should be maintained and be dealt with within the confines of a sovereign called the Republic. You will be aware that the previous administration of Robert Mugabe, who was the former president, maybe could have gave lip service to this issue or massaged it and swept it under the carpet. But why do you think maybe at this opportune time you have got to provoke and discuss about solutions to the extent that you say, you compare, to say, okay, if you want to use comparisons, do you know that somebody would then woke up and say stupidly that in Rwanda there was a genocide that killed 800,000 people, and in Zimbabwe you are talking about 20,000 or less people because that number has not been quantified by facts. Then you say, so our issue is a lesser issue. I think you are talking wrongly and you do not have perspective around, a correct perspective about that issue, because the death of one individual amounts to 1 million. That's how we take it, at least from our own perspective. Then I will come lastly to what Professor Henry Flochko talked about. I like Comrade Malinga's approach to this issue when he talked about the history of violence. But besides the history of violence in our country, I think there is also an attachment to it, which is a history of distorted tribal relations. Okay? Yes. Why I'm saying that, you will understand what happened after the 1836 arrival of Mzilikazi and his fellow colleagues, who are legitimately Zimbabweans, and I don't doubt her. And then the animosity that happened between our societies, then both the Shona societies and other societies, and the developers, you know them. You know what happened in Masvingo province, and how certain tribes were not accustomed to doing things for themselves, but survived on raiding. That is well documented. But and then to the extent of non-polling, to the extent that at this stage, the issue of Gukurahundi, my question is, the reason why I'm going back to that issue is that let's not engage the history of Gukurahundi from a tribal perspective. Okay, I will talk about Joseph Msika, the late vice president of this country, was a vice president and a member of ZAPA. He did not come from the province that we are talking about, just a stone throw away from Church. Okay, but he could have been a victim of that process, but does not share tribe with the majority of people that were, that are presumed to have suffered according to me. So I'm saying, let's not take a tribal approach to this issue, or at least try to achieve cheap politics arising out of victims. There is so much in for these victims which we should fight for collectively as a society. That to say that the question of Gukurahundi only comes topical, big, bold, black headlines, when we are during a few months preceding to elections. Okay? To the extent that some people are now accustomed to be called Gukurahundi. Some are now accustomed to be called all sorts of names from having been called Amahole, Amasina, all those things. But some people do not believe in calling other people names because of their tribe. So I'm saying the moment we provoke or invoke tribal connotations around this issue, we lose the battle. The question, I'm about to finish now. The question is, the people who suffered out of this process perhaps would want birth certificates, as it were. We would want national identification. We would want perhaps compensation, as it were. But the question is, holding these processes in order, or when there is suspicion that want to achieve cheap political gains using the victims, I think we'll be missing the point. And let's try to be very careful and be sensitive with this, so that even when we dialogue, let's respect the people who suffer, and some of whom cannot be even panelists there, but let's respect them. And let's talk about what they want, not essentially about how we want to salvage our one in political fortune. Those are my little
My name is Togo Machi. There is a problem. Comrade Dumiso, you said it, that sometimes people talk from a point of authority when they do not know. Okay? My sister, our problem is that when you get married to the Susulus, people think you are not Zimbabwean. And people put labels on you without knowing you. That is a patriarchal problem. That is a problem of not knowing, but having the arrogance of wanting to talk from a point of authority. I don't read xenophobia, okay? I don't read xenophobia. I live xenophobia as a Zimbabwean who is working in South Africa. And any Zimbabwean who has to deal with that xenophobia in South Africa knows that Eleanor is one of the key faces in fighting. I said a comment is not a question, okay? And you are not a person. Because you inferred that she doesn't know anything about xenophobia. Okay? She's one of the faces that fight with government, South African government, that protects the Zimbabweans and pushes for certain things on that. So I am a women's activist, and one of the things I say is that it's amazing, and I see it in young men, and I thought it was maybe for the older men, as we struggled with you.
No, we are better actually.
Yeah, but what I see is the thing that continues, where as males, people stand up and become authorities even when they are not. You can't tell one person.
That's a wonderful contribution in our voting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank
you, Alex. My name is Tenai Amuntoto. I'm a medical practitioner in Zimbabwe. I'm a consultant, human rights law consultant, international criminal law consultant, and intelligence consultant. I want to ask a specific question to Dr. Davengo. When you relate to Gukurahundi, I don't hear you say anything to the following effect, that the South African intelligence organization, through its government and the Rhodesians, they were in fact using ex-ZAPU soldiers who had actually gotten out of the army and identified, and they were the ones who were being used by these two organizations to perpetrate to perpetrate such violence and or human rights abuses amongst even the Ndebele people. The Ndebele people suffered also at the hands of the sponsored persons from the defectors from ZAPU. So to that extent, I would like you to be very clear on whether or not it is then true that it was overreached, but it was a necessity to ensure that state security is maintained in Zimbabwe, ensuring that all those that were involved in Gukurahundi, those that had defected from ZAPU, and others still within ZAPU, were being used by these forces to fight the system that was there and to depose the government of the day.
Again, I'm going to give our panelists an opportunity to respond and we'll move on. Starting with Elena.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to my sister Togo for raising the issue of patriarchy and abuse. I want to respond on this issue of having the right or not the right to speak on a platform, because I am now in South Africa married to a South African. I believe in Pan-Africanism. I was taught about Pan-Africanism when I was at University of Zimbabwe. One of my lecturers was Mishek Sibanda, who I believe, I don't know what his position is now, but he was one of the best lecturers on African history we could find anywhere. And through him, I learned about Kwame Nkrumah. I learned about Pan-Africanism, and I believe in Pan-Africanism. And I believe as an African, I have a right to speak anywhere, and not least the country of my birth. And any African has the right to speak anywhere. As I have defended the rights of Africans to speak in South Africa, whether they be from Zimbabwe or Burundi or Congo or wherever. I have been part of the African Diaspora, Forum, and the abuse you are in Tanzania, but you are xenophobic and you are an abuser. You are an abuser.
Thank you. Okay.
You are an abuser.
Right, I'm answering your question. I'm answering your question. Why did you ask it? I'm answering your question and you're busy talking to somebody there. If I did not make a mistake to say he was 25 years, but probably I made a mistake. Did I say his father? Meant his grandfather. The child was born by a lady, and there was Wuti. The name, if the father did not acknowledge Nansinga, the woman would say the surname of the grandfather, of her father. So this guy is Dube, which is the mother's surname, and it's his grandfather in actual fact who was killed. So I knew the old man Dube, who actually was killed or disappeared during Gukurahundi, and I could do an affidavit for that. But I'm sorry if I didn't explain that properly. But he was 25 years because I did record that from his blood. The issue of bringing in, not bringing in tribalism, quote what people like Enos Nkala said when he was in Matebeleland. And he said, "Ngisweli sepa yokuzigeza ingabi ngumndebeli." Says, I don't know where I can get the type of soap who can wash me and take out my being of Ndebele tribe. And I'm sorry for all you who are Ndebeles, because Gukurahundi is going to deal with you. These are recorded remarks in the newspapers. Go and look for them, you'll find it. So, the issue of tribalism is not being just brought in like that. There was an intention, because they said the Zapo people were mainly in Matabeleland, and during the vote, they almost got all the votes in Matabeleland. In other words, it was a rejection of the ZANU-PF government as far as they were concerned. So they must be wiped out together with their leadership. I don't know whether you heard me. I pointed out that there was Super Zapu, which was recruited by the South African intelligence. And these were Zipra guys, yes, that were recruited in order to cause confusion, and they went around doing things, killing even people that were of both of Ndebele origin and everything. I did say that. I said there was Super Zap, which was recruited by the South Africans. Done.
Thank you. In the interest of time, what I'm going to do is to come back to my panelists so that each one of them just gives one bite for 30 seconds. Then we move on. I'll come back to you. Starting with Professor Rupia.
I'm hoping in Zimbabwe.
Sorry.
Very briefly, I'm hoping now that we
I just want to say that violence starts with words. Abuse starts with intimidation. And we have seen that here today. It is personal attacks on people. And I want to say it's really sad to see such intolerance here today. And I just want to pay tribute to a great woman who I've been thinking of as I've been sitting here. Sheena Seni Dube. I am talking about Shiva Dube. I am talking about Shiva Dube. Show some respect. You talked about respect. Show respect. I'm talking about a great Zimbabwean woman. Show respect. A woman who you don't even know. Show respect. Shiva Dube was a great Zimbabwean woman. She was a humanitarian. She was raped during Gukurahundi. She felt so bad about her rape that she had a room removed. And I would like to say the spirit of Shiva Dube, for me and for women, future generations of women, if her spirit can influence us and her example and her history, we will be a better country and a continent.
Let's move on. Simple.
I want to thank Dr. Mandaza for organizing this this meeting. I was under no illusion whether this meeting would resolve the issues that we face as a country. I had initially declined because I had other commitments, but I reflected and I realized I have to be here, and I came. I was actually even more excited when I saw my fellow panelists, when Dr. Mandaza told me who else would be on the panel, and I felt it would be an honor to speak at the same place as my fellow panelists, all of whom I have the greatest respect for. I want to thank the audience, at least the part of the audience that has patiently listened, patiently braved, you know, the heckling, the difficulty. At the end of the day, I believe that we are fully responsible, as we are no longer young. At least I look at my own generation, and there's a sense of agency I feel. I feel a huge sense of agency, as Dr. Jabenga spoke about earlier, that he was asked by somebody, what are you going to do when you go and leave us this problem? I feel a huge sense of agency that we must deal with this issue. And I believe that we must refuse to be deterred in dealing with this issue. Yes. The reality is that the current crop of our political leaders, who we call our fathers, I mean, my father is dead, he died in 1994, but I have never on any day forgotten the weight of the responsibility that he left us. And I believe that the business that he did not finish, because he fought for this country and he died for this country, he's buried at the National Heroes Acre. He's a national hero. But he didn't finish the business. We must finish it. So at the end of the day, I remain very humbled that we still have a lot of work to do. And I encourage my brothers, my younger brothers. I know you have participated very enthusiastically, very vociferously, but I encourage you, I want to encourage you, because humility is always very important. I want to encourage you to learn something from this. It is important for the conversation to continue. And tolerance is what is going to move us forward as a country. And last but not least, I really hope that this is one of many conversations to happen. And I will be at every one, regardless of how it turns out. I'm going to be there.
We'll meet you there.
Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to make my contribution on this matter. Please, my appeal to you all, or to us all, is that we don't trivialize the issue of Gukurahundi. You, the young people, should be keen to help resolve this issue. If you don't resolve it, you will get problems in the future which you will not be able to solve. We're trying to solve the problems for you and for the future of this country. And therefore, take it seriously. Don't trivialize it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. We've come to the end of our dialogue. Thank you, Sapes. Thank you, panelists. Thank you all for your active participation. We continue the dialogue. Thank you. Good evening.
Attention, please.
Wow, I'm sure your father's spirit is happy.
Attention.
We knew him very well. And now, thank you very much.